Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, necessity truly is the mother of invention. When people need to get something done or do something, they will figure out a way to do it. That has never been more painfully obvious as these last few years. Welcome again to the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. An example of the people's resourcefulness in difficult times may very well be borne out in this new direction of social entrepreneurism. We'll talk some about this and its growing acceptance. And later on, back again, North Carolina's CFO, State Treasurer Janet Cowell.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded March 16, 2012. On this week's program, Dirk Brown of the University of South Carolina, Charles Thomas of Queen City Forward, and special guest Janet Cowell, North Carolina Treasurer. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Gentlemen, I guess we can say happy spring. That counts. Yeah. Pretty nice. Welcome. Good to have you both here. Dirk, let me start with you. You know, you both kind of hover and work in this entrepreneurial area. Charles, you a little bit more of a social entrepreneur, which I think is pretty interesting. And Dirk, you a little bit more from the academic standpoint. But I'm going to start with you, Dirk. You know, since 2008, and things have been tough and different. I think different is probably a better way to say it. Do we need to think differently about incenting risk-taking, incenting growth? You know, I think we're still trying to apply, it seems like we're still trying to apply some of the old models and when the game has clearly changed.
Yeah, I think so. You know, if you look at North America and you look at the world economy today, there's a lot of dynamic situations going on multiple fronts, and I think innovation and the growth tied to small companies in the United States is going to be a key aspect of the economic development for the entire country moving forward.
Charles, what do you think?
I completely agree. What we're finding around social entrepreneurship is that with our economy and kind of what we've been through, and in particular in Charlotte, we've seen that it's time that we need to diversify how we approach how we do business and to be more innovative. And that all applies and goes into building an economy that's sustainable and continues to grow. And so I completely agree that it's a good time for entrepreneurship and that we need to be intentional about how we help entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. But
you know, yours has a different phenomenon to it. It's not just entrepreneurs from the standard definition of what entrepreneurs have been, but you have this whole social piece, which kind of talks, in my mind, it sounds like NGO or nonprofit entrepreneur. So why is that going to drive it?
Well, let's step back and kind of define social entrepreneurship. So a social entrepreneur is someone or an organization that's dedicated to having a positive social impact and is dedicated to generating revenue, and being profitable. And so typically we think of NGOs or nonprofits as being focused on, helping or serving the community. But also typically when we think of nonprofits, we don't necessarily think of them as profitable. Right. Well, with social entrepreneurs, we're looking at how can, with social entrepreneurship and enterprises, how can nonprofits be profitable and think of new ways and be innovative in how they generate revenue. And then on the for-profit side, and the reason we include both nonprofits and for-profits, is how can we look at our for-profit sector and how they're generating revenue and how they're creating what we call shared value, where they're creating value for investors and value for the community. And we feel that it's a critical time in our history and our economy, because consumers are very much savvy now, and we are all savvy and understand that in order, we all are looking for a sustainable way of living. We want not only our economy to grow, but we want our planet to thrive, and we want people to thrive. And so social entrepreneurs are on the cutting edge of creating what we call a sustainable economy, where the focus is on, helping people, the planet, as well as being profitable.
So Dirk, how does that square with the academic traditional, if that's possible, a traditional entrepreneurial role? Seems a little bit different, bifurcated, but how does that square with what you guys are teaching and what you're doing?
Well, interestingly, there's a movement called conscious capitalism, which marries the for-profit motives of corporations and the social motives of social entrepreneurship. And it turns out that what we used to think was a contradiction in terms of being able to help and be socially conscious and make money at the same time. We used to think that that was a difficult thing to do. It turns out that the companies today that are more socially conscious are actually outperforming, in most cases, their competitors. And it has to
by
do
a performance standard, by the standard metrics?
By traditional financial metrics. And the reason we believe, and a lot of research going on in this area, Chris, is that because the internet will set you free, because consumers and competitors, but also your supply chain and your distribution channels, they have a lot more visibility today into what you're doing as a company than they would have had 10 or 20 years ago. And as a result, if you're a good citizen and you do good things and people see that, they actually reward you for that economically in the market.
And is that the sense that you get with some of the folks that come through the doors in this social entrepreneurial?
Most definitely. So what we're doing is we're building kind of a community around social entrepreneurship, because so many people don't understand what that term means and we're kind of caught in these old ways of thinking about nonprofits and for-profit. And so we're advocating and trying to educate folks about how you can be purpose-driven in how you pursue capitalism or conscious. And so people are coming in as either wanting to start a business in this field or wanting to, help out instead of volunteering to your time to say, go on a weekend and help maybe build a house or help with kids. You may see a lot of folks that are working in your typical big businesses volunteering their time to mentor and to help socially motivated businesses.
Charles, is it easier to raise money and attract money to a social venture type of initiative?
Good question. I think it's just as challenging as a typical venture. I think you have investors that are still and I think it might be even more challenging because if you're a social venture, you're kind of falling in between, right? If you're nonprofit, you can go for a grant. People understand what you are. But if you're for-profit and you have a social mission and you're focused on that, then investors are a little leery. And so that's why it's a good time to start educating folks about what social entrepreneurship is and what it means and what are the returns. I was reading an article about we sometimes miss some of the true costs to how we do business. So if a company is generating profits but having some negative consequences or externalities, we don't necessarily factor in pollution as a cost into as we compare it to revenue. And so that's a critical element that we're working on educating folks on.
Dirk, were you nodding your head because it's harder to raise money with that type of approach?
Absolutely. I've seen that. So you'll notice that I did not talk about investors or venture capitalists when I listed the people that are rewarding these companies. I think that the investment community hasn't got up to speed yet on the idea that social entrepreneurial ventures can actually be very they can actually have a financial advantage as a return on your investment. Most investors haven't bought into that yet. They think if you're doing good for the environment or doing good for society, that you're taking a hit on your bottom line, and that requires some education, and I think that there's a challenge there.
Well, and I ask this question with all due respect, and I truly mean with all due respect. Do you all believe that, is it the romantic idea that this should be a good idea, or is there actual concrete evidence that this really is a new phenomenon and it's going to change the way things work?
From my perspective, there's emerging evidence, and so the jury's out, very candidly. And we see much more data in retail ventures that suggest that it is the case, that social entrepreneurial retail ventures where consumers are becoming very conscious about whether or not you're doing good things or bad things for society. There's some clear data to suggest that they're benefiting from that. Yeah. But if you're making semiconductor devices or medical devices in a B2B setting, the data is not as clear yet.
Yeah, okay. That'll be the last word. We're going to bring our guest on in just a second.
Sounds great.
You know, we're talking about some of the softer science around our business. Next week and the following week on this program, we're going to have a special two-part Carolina Business Review. We are calling it The Public Conscience. And what is that all about? Well, character does matter. We've asked we've asked time and again on this program that character really does matter. But how does it matter, and where does the moral compass in business and in all things around business and public policy, where does that start with? I think you'll find this panel very compelling. Mostly clergy on this panel, but I think you'll probably ask yourself, how does that fit into business? You'll have to tune in to find out. You know, we're getting ready now to find out from the source about how the Tar Heel State's fortunes are faring. We talk about entrepreneurialism. This is on the other end of the scale. It would seem that given the sustained string of positive economic news that the North Carolina General Fund balances would be headed higher. Well, joining us now, State Treasurer Janet Cowell. Your Honor, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So our general fund balance is headed higher. Do you feel good about the direction?
We're seeing some increase in taxes coming into the coffers. Obviously, the big April tax date is yet to arrive, but we're about 3% up in personal income, 3 to 4% up in corporate income. So it's nice to see, you know, growth in revenues, but you know, it's not dramatic enough that you can, you know, really start celebrating. And again, we kind of have to wait for the April income tax returns.
Would you call it a recovery in general tax?
I would call it a recovery. Yeah.
You would?
A slow.
It's important
slow
to
recovery,
say.
yes.
Yeah, right. Do you get this, Madam Treasurer, how far out will we have to go at this pace to say that we were back where we were in 2008?
You know how long it'll be, and obviously we're also changing our revenues. You know, we cut the sales tax last year, they let that sunset, so we've also been cutting revenues, so it's hard to kind of, you know, get an apples to apples comparison.
Would you guess that there's a, and you were in the General Assembly, you kind of know how the sausage is made, for better or for worse. Is there a chance, I just ask this quickly, is there a chance that this, Bev Perdue has proposed a possible 3/4 cent sales tax for education? Could you see that becoming part of the initiative here?
Well, as an elected official, I can tell you it's election year, and it's always tougher in an election year to do anything about increasing taxes or fees. You know, my sense is that there is some real momentum around revenue reform, tax modernization. I talked to the Speaker this past week of the House, and I know Senator Rucho from here in Charlotte has been active on that issue recently. So my anticipation is it'll be 2013 and they'll take a more holistic view about tax modernization as opposed to doing maybe a one-off this year. But again, I'm a bystander. It's up to the General Assembly.
Well said. Dirk, question?
Yeah, well, we're both entrepreneurs, so clearly we're thinking about things like government-sponsored competitiveness. And so along those lines, North Carolina has really shown leadership, I would say, in the whole Southeast in terms of being proactive in helping high-growth, high-impact companies. The Moore School of Business just recently released a report showing that in South Carolina, less than 3% of the companies account for more than 2/3 of the job creation in that state. I assume that the same type of thing is happening in North Carolina. You've put in your innovation fund into place. What's next on the horizon for North Carolina for government helping to drive these high-impact, high-growth companies?
Well, you mentioned the innovation fund, so we are, I think, you know, proud of that effort, and I think that effort's going well. That's the $232 million private equity fund to invest in everything from middle market to earlier stage companies. We more recently announced the accelerator portion of that, which is trying to get to earlier stage and life science, med device, pharmaceuticals, et cetera. I think still the next challenge out there is the sort of valley of death, the super early stage funding, which is...
Is that an official term that's used?
It actually is.
The valley of death?
Yes. That is harder for a pension fund because obviously every investment I make is fiduciarily, you know, on behalf of the pensioners. Those are higher risk investments, but we are in conversation with a number of both private sector players, as well as cities, Golden Leaf, others, to think about, can we put together a very early stage fund for North Carolina that would not have as much pressure on the pure market risk-adjusted rate of return, and would have a little more time, so that's really the next big challenge.
Nice to hear.
Charles.
Madam Treasurer, as you know, our focus is on social entrepreneurship, and as been mentioned, North Carolina has taken quite some initiative with the fund. And just wondering your thoughts on social entrepreneurship and how it affects North Carolina, and the connections that it may have with the fund, and the opportunities to work with social enterprises and help stimulate growth in those areas as well.
Well, and of course, going back to the Innovation Fund, certain states have taken a more of a social entrepreneurial approach even to that sort of investing. I will say, just because this is a pension money, we didn't feel that that would be in keeping with the fiduciary responsibility, so ours is more of a free market sort of investment fund. But that said, we do try to incubate smaller organizations. Again, and this is not necessarily social impact, but we are looking at emerging managers in the public equity, stock managers, emerging managers who may be coming out of universities, here, who don't have large amounts of capital under management, but they're, starting and they're doing really well with, 25 million, 50 million, looking to, as a pension fund, to work to make sure we're investing with some of those new, starting up sort of entrepreneurs. Right. Again, not necessarily social, but we do collaborate on a policy basis to encourage some of the other things. And I'm very, happy to hear and meet you and the work you're doing, and of course the great work that's going on in Durham.
Right. If you are not constrained by, this is not the right way to say it, but if you are not constrained by the fiduciary responsibility that you had to the pensioners that you just talked about, and you could be more creative in what you could do to encourage economic growth, what would you do differently that wouldn't be outside the parameter of undue risk?
Right. Well, and I think that's where, we have the Sheets Fund, which is the lost property fund, which was, I said previously, $700 million. And that's a fund, because it's not someone's pension, where there's been a little more leeway to take longer term investments, a little riskier investments, or things that may be a little more creative. And some of the funds we do have in there currently, NC IDEA, which has been more of a startup. And that, again, is where we could probably take, an earlier stage focus. But in the pension, it's just, with the fiduciary responsibility. Won't
ever happen, should never happen.
Right.
Yeah, right, okay, Dirk.
Well, following up on the theme of your investment strategies for the pension fund, we, at the Moore School, we're hosting a fixed income conference next month. And I was amazed at the caliber and the number of people that are coming to that conference. And so, fixed income, what are your thoughts given the lay of the land with the banking crisis?
Well, we have a big investment-grade fixed income portfolio, about 40% of our pension still, which is going to be a challenge, because with interest rates where they are, we'll need to, shift money out of that in order to make our 7.25 target rate of return. So that's certainly a challenge. Now, we have done a lot of fixed income investing or credit investing in non-investment grade, and we have a 5%. Of up to 5% of the portfolio can be non-investment grade, and that's where we've done the majority of our transactions, because we've had so many distressed plays coming out of the recession, and we've done well, and that the legislature gave us authority to invest there. So it is a broad topic. Obviously, I don't know whether yours is investment or non-investment or both, but it's been a hot area of investment, and last year that was still where we made the bulk of our returns, was in the fixed income portfolio.
Warren Buffett even said, Madam Treasurer, that fixed income is the most dangerous asset class right now. Does that keep you up at night?
It does keep me up at night, although again, we've worked very well with the General Assembly. We will need greater flexibility, and again, I was last week talking to my friends over there, telling them some of the challenges with this income rate environment, that we're going to need to shift some money out, or we'd have to adjust our target rate of return down.
Sure.
One of the areas that we also focus on at Queen City Forward is being a part of the whole kind of ecosystem for entrepreneurship. And in kind of my new role in learning more about Charlotte and kind of taking a look at Durham, and seeing that sometimes there's a disconnect between the entrepreneurship community and the two areas. And just wanted to get your perspective on how, the fund is definitely taking some initiative in helping to stimulate the ecosystem, but building that connectivity such that we are operating as a state, or potentially creating corridors for entrepreneurial activity, maybe up the I-85 corridor. But just your thoughts on how we can bridge sometimes what seem like separated sections of our state.
No, that's absolutely true. I think, again, as an elected official, you realize how siloed so many of us are in our day-to-day worlds. And I do think there's a role as the bully pulpit of the office as an investor, and even though we can't, it's not appropriate for us to do it all, we can talk about policies that might spur innovation or try to bridge different parts of the community. I mean, just recently I sat down with Brooks Bell, who's an entrepreneur in Raleigh, a young woman who graduated from Duke, your alma mater, and her husband's also an entrepreneur, and we're talking about having her come into the treasurer's office just to kind of tell about her story and sort of inspire, you know, some of the folks that are working in a public sector but still looking to innovate. Just to your point, just to bridge that, and it's just one small way. I think these entrepreneurship conferences that have been happening around the state, where I know Raleigh recently did one, and obviously what you're doing in Charlotte, of bringing together the scientists, the academics, the public sector, the private sector, and trying to get people to work together, because ultimately we're all just, you know, one piece of the pie, and it'll take, you know, all that collaboration. So any way I can help you, I mean, let me know. I'm down here a lot as well. So
we were talking about fixed income, and there's a moratorium on general obligation bonds in the state of North Carolina through the balance of next year. Give us a sense of where we are, Janet, when it comes to what does that mean that we don't want to add any more GO bonds, and what would that do to our potential credit rating, and how does that all affect us?
Well, first off, we have AAA credit rating, which of course I tout all the time by all 3 rating agencies. So we're one of 8 states that has the best credit rating. And some people will say we've maxed out our credit card in North Carolina. That's actually an incorrect statement, because what we've done in North Carolina is say we're going to be very conservative on debt, and we're going to set our own limit of 4% of revenues, which is a very you think about your own personal budget. I mean, 4% of your total revenues is what you're doing to debt service. And that would be our equivalent of the home mortgage, the car payment, you know. So it's very conservative. And we've said we don't want to go over that. And that is what we mean when we say we're maxed out. Because revenues fell in 2008, because we cut sales taxes last year, if you're doing a percentage of revenue, obviously we just don't have additional revenue, so there's not any capacity. That said, there's still a lot of activity going on at a local level. I mean, they have a slightly higher debt authority because they're basing it off property taxes, which, I mean, now the valuations are down.
A county has the ability to issue GO bonds?
They can also issue debt. Now, many counties, including Mecklenburg, are AAA rated. You know, the city of Charlotte, the county of Mecklenburg, Wake. We have more AAA rated local government units than any other state in the country, and they issue their own debt. Well, obviously the muni bonds that are, and our muni bonds sell very well. And I think we'll continue to, because we have very sound financial management in the state. So there's still a lot of activity there. You're seeing, for example, the toll road that just opened up in Wake County, where there's additional revenues. And then there's, of course, continued interest in public-private partnerships. We do invest in infrastructure through the pension. Most of that has been energy infrastructure, like really higher value add, you know, higher return, natural gas pipeline, petroleum, utilities. So we are investing in infrastructure ourselves as well.
We have about a minute left there.
Real quick question on ecosystem, innovation ecosystem. So North Carolina has been a leader in the Southeast in terms of putting in place an infrastructure to really support high growth business historically. And many of the other states have sort of followed the lead. What can the state do from your perspective to support you in your financial objectives?
Well, I mean, there's always, you know, collaboration. Like one thing we did is, you know, we have a private equity portfolio that's over, not just the innovation, but the whole thing, about $3.5 billion. So we're investing in high growth companies all around the world. And, you know, we said, why don't we look at those high growth companies? What if some of them were in states with unfavorable tax and they're looking to move? That next step they want to do, you know, they want to expand, and why not North Carolina, because we're already an investor. And we did cull through our portfolio. We gave some leads actually here to folks in Charlotte, as well as, you know, the Department of Commerce. So, you know, I think those kind of collaborations where we're sitting on a lot of data and connections. If we all work together, we could probably, you know, have more success.
Thank you for being on the program again. I'm still getting my head around that Valley of Death statement. That's kind of unique. I don't know that Harlan Boyles would ever said that, but Maybe he would have, but nice to have you on the
Thank
program
you.
again.
Thank
Thank you. Good to see you. Charles, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Dirk, welcome from Columbia. Hottest place in the South, right? Isn't that what's the new city thing?
Famously hot.
Famously hot.
That's
yeah,
right.
correct. Until next week, good night. I'm Chris Williams.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.